All right, thank you everybody. We'll get started. Sorry for the couple of minutes of wasted time, but I appreciate your patience. My name is Mazen Chouay. I'm the CEO of Canadian Leaders International Consulting. It's a small company based here in Ottawa. We do a lot of international work and international development. Mostly, a lot of our work is focused on Middle East and North Africa, but we also work globally. I'm happy to talk to you guys later. I don't want to take too much of this presentation's time because I think we have a very, very valuable conversation to have and three very distinguished panelists who have a lot of real-life experience that I am personally looking forward to listening to. One note, we were supposed to have somebody from Global Affairs Canada to join us, but unfortunately last minute they were unable to participate for whatever reason. So we'll go directly into the specialists, the practitioners. One of the reasons I personally decided to, when they asked me if I could chair one of the panels, I decided to chair this one, and I was very happy to do it because I'm myself looking to some answers. I'm trying to understand with today's world, how the world is working, how we are working, how the changes that happen mostly, I would say, not fully, but mostly after COVID, with a lot of the changes that we started to observe, to experience, and a lot of the changes within the international economy, within the international development world and the field. Trying to understand myself how I can work with partners globally as well as in Canada. I remember something, a friend of mine, a Canadian friend of mine who's had 30, 40 years experience working in development said to me one time, and it struck me as harsh, but he said to me, one of the problems we have in Canada, we do not know how to work in partnerships together as Canadian companies and organizations and colleagues. So I found that a bit harsh, but I think there was some truth to it. I'm finding it challenging to connect personally and not to connect, but to develop those partnerships and find a way to work well together where everybody wins and everybody benefits and learns as well as we do this type of work. So I'll stop here, and we do have three panelists. We're going to start today. The first is Rebecca Thiessen. Am I saying it right, Rebecca? Thank you. And Rebecca is a professor at the School of International Development Global Studies. Her bio is here. But what is interesting about Rebecca's presentation today, and she's going to be using a PowerPoint, is the fact that she comes at it from an academician or an academic point of view, as well as someone who's working in international development, and we're looking at it as well from how also the academic institutions are involved in international development and how those partnerships are being created and worked in. So I'll stop here. I'll have you make your presentation and we'll have a conversation. So, but before I do this, this was the house cleaning part. This is not a Chatham House conversation. We can share the information and you can use it whichever way you like to. So be comfortable. We will have the panelists present and then we will have a conversation with you. And I'm hoping, well, the good thing about not having a fourth presenter is that we will have a good group of people here. So maybe we can learn from each other a lot more in the question and answer period. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mazen. I'm going to stay a little bit close here to the microphone so it can be picked up in the recording. And I'm going to talk about three different examples of scholar-practitioner collaboration in some of the work that I've had the opportunity to engage in. And what I would really love to hear from you in the discussion period afterwards is maybe some of your own experiences in these kinds of collaborations, what works and what's not working, what you'd like to see, and how the different ways that I'm engaged in this, maybe how I could facilitate new ways of scholar-practitioner collaboration. So my three examples are around the different portfolios that I'm working on. One as a professor doing research. The second is in my role as the director of the Gender, Peace and Security Collaboratory and a member of the Research Network on Women, Peace and Security. And the third is some collaboratory work we've been doing with the Canadian Association for the Study of International Development, for which I am the vice president, CACID, as we call it for short, is a partner with CAIDP, and we have some reciprocal relationships and have done some work in the past together and will continue to do so. So I think about partnership, first of all, in line with the SDGs, SDG 17 in particular, partnership for the goals, with an intention of strengthening the means of implementing and revitalizing global partnerships for sustainable development. And this means bringing together diverse stakeholders. Sometimes it's government, sometimes civil society, private sector, UN system. Sometimes it's a combination of those things. There are important considerations here around mobilizing resources, so I'll try to highlight a few ways that we've tried to do that, and also how it's linked to capacity building to support national plans, but capacity building for the next generation of scholars and practitioners, emerging experts in the area of international development. So I will highlight where I can some of the changes over time, some of the reasons for innovation, some trends and observations that I've observed, lessons learned, and some future opportunities. But again, I'd really love to hear what you see as some of those future opportunities also. So the first thing I'll talk about is research partnerships. And in terms of leveraging resources, a lot of the funding that we've managed to do through research partnerships has come from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, SSHRC for short. And over a long period of time, we've been able to mobilize this funding to engage in scholar-practitioner collaborations. And we've done it with many different organizations. As researchers, we've collaborated with development NGOs, the World University Service of Canada, WUSC, CUSO International, Forum, which is an international forum for volunteer cooperation that meets each year to discuss international development volunteering. And one of the projects that we've worked on is in collaboration with a colleague, Jim Delaney, who's in the room, to look at the distinctive contributions of international volunteers to gender equality programming. And so what we did is we worked to understand what the different perspectives were from partner organizations. What do they think about hosting international development volunteers, or interns, as some prefer to call them? What were their perspectives of working with Canadian-based international interns or volunteers in their communities through their programs? So to start off this project, we got some SSHRC funding from the Connections Grant, which basically gave us money to bring a bunch of people together, scholars, practitioners, pracademics, where we had an opportunity to talk about what we see as the challenges, the opportunities, and the innovations for collaboration to better understand the contributions of international volunteering to development. So out of that meeting, Jim Delaney, myself, Jessica Kadeski, who was a PhD student but is a practitioner doing consulting work, and my colleague in the US, University of Illinois, Ben Lowe, we prepared a publication in the Canadian Journal of Development Studies based on research we did with scholars, practitioners, and academics to find out what they saw as challenges, benefits, and what we maybe should be doing. So among the challenges for scholar-practitioner collaborations, and there are no big surprises here, one is time. There's just a lot of desire to work, to collaborate between practitioners and scholars, but there's a lack of time on both ends. There are some challenges also around managing expectations, right? So scholars might go into a collaboration to do some mutual learning. Maybe it's a joint evaluation or an extension of an evaluation. And researchers might go in, scholars might go in with a kind of primary motivation around publications. And our practitioner colleagues might go in with other motivations around having a stronger, more robust analysis of what's working in their development programming. So managing those expectations is one of the challenges. But there are many, many benefits that were identified. Both scholars, practitioners saw it as mutually beneficial. It was an opportunity for practitioners through these networks to have better access to research and publications. So through these collaborations, they could maybe get access to university library resources. They were able to read more about what's being written in the field. And for scholars, one of the benefits was around access is being able to access community partners and also locally based researchers to support collaborative research and to try and build capacity of locally based researchers as well. That access through the partner organizations, strong, long-standing involvement and networks in those communities sometimes facilitated research and allowed us to, get our ethics approval, contact community members, figure out what programs made sense to be looking at. But from our findings, we also noted that there are a lot of things that still need to be done. It always happens. There's always construction going on, right? It always takes me back to my PhD defense when the exact same noise was going on during my defense, and I kept thinking it sounded like the dentist office. All right, so funding the process, right? So scholar-practitioner collaboration has a lot of potential to get funding in terms of doing data collection and then actually writing up findings and doing some outreach activities, creating those outputs. But the process of coming together to co-design a project, that is where there's often lack of time. Sometimes there's different expectations. And then there's also the challenge of just being able to be in a space and have that time to co-design the proposals. So one of the challenges is that in a SSHRC grant application, I might sit down as an academic and write the entire proposal, give it to my partners in the practitioner world with whom I'm collaborating to give input. We co-design it, but not in a really fair process, right? So there are, opportunities for thinking about how that could happen. I know in some of the other work that we did, that I'll get to later around the Next Generation project we did with IDRC funding, we wanted to create spaces for practitioners to be able to leave their practice work, maybe be a fellow or a professor in residence or a research fellow within the university that bought them out some time to actually sit and meet with academics and to really take that time to reflect more. So that's one example. I have so many examples and I could spend a lot of time in each one. From that work, we then engaged in different research that allowed us to hire locally based researchers in more than 15 countries to collect data. It was important for us to have locally based researchers to do data collection because we were trying to limit as much as possible some of the biases around, yes, international development volunteering is fantastic, we love it, right? We really wanted to try and get more honest impressions. So in the first study, we hired 9 researchers in 9 countries who collected data. They analyzed the data. They wrote up their own journal articles that were then part of this edited collection in 2018, I think it was. 2018. And then they came together at a conference, some of them anyways, and presented their findings. And this was, I think, a really great example of how our scholar-practitioner collaboration facilitated linkages to some of these locally based researchers. Some of them were practitioners and some of them were graduate students, so there was a mix. But it gave them the opportunity to really, as emerging scholars, to shine, right? That this wasn't just the extraction of Canadian academics, extracting information and then publishing it for ourselves. It was an opportunity to give local researchers and practitioners a chance to write up findings and to publish, which they saw value in. A subsequent study we did, there were around 14 different researchers, some Canadian, some international researchers, and through our partnerships with WSC and CUSO, we were able to access communities to do some qualitative research interviews with partner organizations. We also leveraged that partnership to access potential locally based researchers. So it was really important for us to use that the connections that we had, the connections that our partner organizations had, to those communities so that we could try to find locally based researchers who would be a good fit for our study. And then this is a special issue that came out of that research looking at innovations in gender equality and women's empowerment in international development volunteering programs. There are other kinds of great collaborations that maybe some of you have been involved in. Anybody here done access MyTax funding? Some nodding heads. So with MyTax, we've also had the opportunity, I was able to hire Sheila Rao, who is a postdoc who worked part-time with Cooperation Canada and was also a postdoc at the University of Ottawa. Through our two funding sources, she was able to pool the resources that she needed through the MyTax initiative to be able to do her postdoctoral research. So she was able to collect information that Cooperation Canada, formerly CCIC, to collect information that was really important to Cooperation Canada, but was also important to her scholarly work and her publications. And so she was able to straddle these two worlds and to really develop as an emerging researcher and as an emerging scholar and researcher, she was able to really network with different organizations. She was able to access information from the practitioner space and also from the scholarly space. And I have another one that is about another PhD student who's about to work with the Federation for Canadian Municipalities on a MyTax funded project, which will do the same thing. Like, it's just, if you haven't explored MyTax, I encourage you to. It's a really great initiative that allows us to collaborate. It gives students an important and wonderful learning opportunity. The second case study is around the Women, Peace and Security Partnerships, and sorry about this, I had my second slide where I fixed the typo wouldn't upload, so I know that there's the typo there. We have done a lot of these partnerships with the Women, Peace and Security Canada Network, the network of civil society organizations. And through that work, one of the things that we've done is, through my research grants, I've been able to hire research assistants that work part-time with the Women, Peace and Security Network. So in this case, the bridge between scholar and practitioner collaborations is the student. And the student works closely, like the MyTax initiative, the student is able to work closely with the civil society organizations, get really rich experience that trains them, builds their capacity for working in development, but at the same time it enriches our knowledge in the scholarly space as well. So in this work, there's a piece in Looking Back, Looking Forward, an online publication from 2015 where I go into detail about what that bridging looks like and what value it brings to both practitioner and scholarly spaces. The network, research network on women, peace and security, which is something I'm increasingly engaged in. It's more of an academic-led initiative, but it also is a space where we're bringing together scholars and practitioners. I just hosted the annual conference at the University of Ottawa. By the way, kudos to the team who organized the conference right now that we're at, because I'm still trying to recover from February 8th to 10th when I organized this event at the University of Ottawa. But it was a chance for us to bring in scholars and practitioners and students to have conversations with each other. So creating these spaces is so important. Building those networks, getting to know people who then reach out and invite you to other events and continue that dialogue, I think is to me really enriching. And then a collaboration that I wanted to note that's with the Government of Canada was to create the Gender Equality Measurement Tool, Gender Equality and Empowerment Measurement Tool. So back in around 2020, Global Affairs Canada asked me, a consultant that I work closely with, Kate Grantham, and Sheila Rao, who I mentioned earlier, who did the MyTax postdoc. Together we came up with this Gender Equality Measurement Tool. It's a free open access resource guide on the Government of Canada website. If you just type in GEM tool, Government of Canada, you can find it, and it's got detailed resources for how you can do qualitative feminist gender equality and measurement. And why the scholar-practitioner collaboration here? To try to facilitate the kind of intersectional feminist approach that many of us aspire to in our research. but maybe don't have the training or background to do so. So this resource guide is really a training guide that can be used by anybody who want to do an intersectional, feminist, qualitative data collection using focus groups. We tried it with, we worked with local consultants in the Middle East and North Africa, and we had some really great success, and we learned a lot through that collaboration with those practitioners, and through that we were able to come up with this resource guide. And then the last thing I want to talk about, and very briefly, because I think I'm out of time, is CAIDP partnerships. And one of the ones that we completed recently was collaboration on the Next Gen project. Was funded by IDRC, and that was with CCIC. And it was a great opportunity for us to produce a number of important things, like an annual conference, events, and so on, and to build a stronger relationship. But when the funding ends, those events end. And so while there's still like ongoing conversations between us, there's still ongoing activities between CAIDP and Cooperation Canada. Those resources make such a big difference for really having the depth of engagement. These are some of the things that CAIDP does that are really linked around scholar practitioner participation, our annual conference, our journal, research that we do, student prizes, supporting internships, and offering certificate courses. So I guess I just would end by saying, you know, we would welcome some thoughts from the practitioner community about how you might like to better connect, doing maybe like certificate courses and like a one-day event to students to try and, you know, support their learning and capacity building in the practitioner world, get them better prepared for the kinds of work that they'll end up doing when they come and work for you.
Elaine, she will be speaking more. I'm just going to put this. You don't have to get up. You can, you know, we can stay where you are. You know, it's I think it's an academic habit, right? To stand up and
Yeah.
Well, I'm going for the safety behind the podium.
Elaine is going. Is going to speak on the from a perspective of the private sector in international development. She is a program director.
Promotion.
She's just been promoted at Cowater, and I believe that you focus mostly on the working with the Australian DFAT on some of the big projects there. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazin. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. It's really great to be here with all of you. Maybe I will make you not look at my face the whole time. Can we go here? There we go. I feel like that's better for everybody. Great. Actually, you know, I really wanted to mention it was only 6 years ago now that I actually graduated from NPSIA, actually right into Cowater. So it's really special for me to be here today with all of you to share my thoughts on partnership in international development projects, again, from the perspective of the private sector. I'm really going to be speaking practically about our work on the ground and how Cowater as a managing contractor works with local partners in our projects and what that looks like and some of our best practices. But I'll pivot more back towards what I actually prepared for you. But maybe to start, for those of you who may not be as familiar with Cowater International, such as my parents, who still to this day cannot explain what I do for a living to anyone they speak to, we are Canada's largest international development managing and consulting firm. We've worked on over 2,500 projects across 95 countries over the past 39 years. So we're not government, we're not NGO, we are the private sector. And what I'm sharing with you today really comes from my experience working with our gender equality, disability, and social inclusion portfolio, mainly from our DFAT Australia funded projects, which are in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. And they're pretty large programs, ranging anywhere from $20 to $75 million Canadian. These programs have been supporting local development initiatives led by partners through grants since 2013. And the total cumulative grant envelope across 6 programs in that DFAT portfolio that we have is over $200 million in grants. This number is so high because 60 to 65% of those large program budgets are actually all dedicated towards grant funding going to our local partners. The grants are multi-year in length and range anywhere from $50,000 to $7 million each. Over the past 5 years alone, this portfolio of projects has partnered with over 300 organizations. They've varied in type from government partners of all levels, international and national NGOs and CSOs, the private sector, academic institutions, all the way down to the family and individual level, most of whom we work with are women. I personally manage our DFAT Australia-funded Gender-Responsive Equitable Agriculture and Tourism program, otherwise known as GREAT, because we love an acronym. GREAT works in Vietnam. It's about 70 million Canadian dollars, and it's a market systems development program working for women's economic empowerment. And we work with ethnic minority women in Northwest Vietnam, some of the most vulnerable populations in the country. And we work with them in the agriculture and tourism sectors. GREAT has been supporting local development initiatives through 69 partners, utilizing $18 million in program grant funds over the past 5 years. So safe to say, I have some examples that I can share with you on ways that we have worked to foster partnerships with our partners that we work with, many of which were developed or led by my colleagues and also by our team members that we have on the ground. We value working in partnership as it is an important piece of localizing international development. It's been integral to development programs for a long time. And as we know, it's not as simple as finding a local organization to work with and partnering up with them and then simply just having that intervention and then leaving. Working effectively and sustainably with local partners includes setting up the partnership intentionally from the beginning all the way to the end to jointly share decision-making and accountability, something we refer to as a one-team approach. It also means meeting partners where they're at. And through our facilitating role as a managing contractor, we may have to provide financial institutional capacity building, risk management, safeguarding measures, monitoring, and opportunities for partnership brokering. It is these approaches I'd like to run through with all of you today to share what has worked and to reinforce why building a solid partnership foundation is key to managing any challenges that we may encounter when we work with local partners, because as we know in development, there are always challenges. So to start through these examples, really starting at the beginning, when we first start working with a partner, we really pay attention to working with how we're going to establish the partnership with the strongest foundation possible. One way we do this is by hosting a workshop with each partner to jointly design their intervention. And this includes the work plan and the budget. And we also create a fund manual with them. This bottom-up approach allows for the integration of voices from marginalized groups and at the grassroots level, while ensuring alignment to the overall goals of our program. Once joint planning is completed, we work with the partner to guide them through our comprehensive partnership agreement, which along with the work plan, budget, and standard contract clauses, includes grant principles that they must agree to and sign off on to work with us. On our GREAT program, for example, the partnership principles were around adaptive management, women's economic empowerment, market systems development, results-based evidence approaches, transparency, and accountability. While work plans, budget, and partnership agreements are being finalized, each partner undergoes a full due diligence and fiduciary assessment to check for effective financial and project management capacity. These checks are documented in detail, including notes of areas of improvement that may be needed in order to proceed with our project implementation. This could include looking at their organizational and legal structure, their financial management, their internal control systems, procurement systems, personnel management, sustainability, and of course, child protection and safeguarding. Partners then go through an onboarding, which includes an overview of reporting and financial requirements, systems and procedures and policies. And again, we really stress that we're checking we have proper fraud control policies, as well as child protection and prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment policies. If these organizations don't have those policies or don't have them at a level that are comprehensive enough for our work, it doesn't mean that we don't work with them. What we do is work side by side with them to develop those policies in a way that ensures they have ownership over them. And that we found that to be a really effective method and one that doesn't leave any partners behind. And importantly, during onboarding, all these partners receive training on all of these areas that I've already mentioned, ensuring that everyone has a really full understanding of Coldwater's policies and the way that we work, as well as our donor. We have found that conducting this high level of due diligence, identifying financial and organizational areas for improvement, and organizing that corresponding training for those areas from the beginning of the partnership greatly reduces safeguarding and fraud risks, allowing for implementation to be smoother and to enhance our partnership. Another approach we use to manage effective partnerships is through robust monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning tools. On GREAT, we perform a performance assessment analysis every 6 months to ensure that if there are any issues in performance from our partners, that they are caught early. We also conduct annual partner performance assessments to evaluate partners on predetermined criteria, putting capacity or safeguarding in place if necessary. Most of our programs on our DFAT portfolio also have developed real-time evidence-based reporting through our customized management information systems, or MIS. This was a tool that became increasingly important during COVID when reporting from the field and data collection became extremely limited. On GREAT, for example, where, as I mentioned, we work with ethnic minority women, they're really in remote mountainous areas. These partners did not have access to laptops in order to even access the MIS system. So we were able to actually pivot and redesign the MIS to be available on cell phones so that it was readily available to everyone in the community, allowing for real-time monitoring of our projects in progress. We found that strong outcome and impact monitoring is crucial to not only measure the impact of our partners, but also to be able to maximize our ways of working, as is another opportunity to course correct in real time if needed. Another monitoring tool I wanted to share with you that we use is participatory audits. Participatory audits are actually a co-author created initiative for partner granting. Essential to this process is that the grantee being audited is closely involved in the actual audit itself, in the planning, the data collection, analysis, and problem solving. This enforces the feeling of partnership between us and our partner and makes the audit a little bit less intimidating in order to maximize its benefit. The partner is involved in setting the scope, planning, and coordinating, while our project team on the ground actually does the audit. And then the audit results are shared with the partner, and there's a conversation about any audit follow-up that is needed, including what areas may need further capacity building or training. Since 2017, our DFAT-funded programs have conducted more than 130 participatory audits with partners, and we use this methodology to help high-risk partners to improve their capacity to implement our projects. Lastly, I wanted to share one more tool that we use to manage our partnerships, which are Reflect and Refocus workshops. This ways of working activity is organized regularly by GREAT once a year. It brings together DFAT, our donor, our government stakeholders from the project, and our partners to, as the name suggests, reflect and refocus on the work that we're doing and our current program interventions. It is a day-long session that is used to review project implementation to ensure alignment by all parties to the overall goals of our project, and to also recognize top-performing partners. Importantly, it's a time for partners to share, in their own words, through workshops co-facilitated between themselves and our team, lessons that they learned from the year, so there's a lot of peer sharing. It has been our experience that this type of partnership brokering opens up lines of communication and enhances coordination among partners, especially as an avenue for us to hear from the local organizations themselves on their challenges, as well as on the direction that they want to work in. So really quickly, those were some of the examples that I had to share with you on approaches we've taken when working with local partners. To leave you with some final thoughts, to maximize potential for partnerships, we've seen success when we are intentional from start to finish, centering on a one-team approach to implementation, ensuring partners jointly share in decision-making and accountability. We've also seen success when we allow our partnerships to be flexible and adaptive, taking consideration where we're working and in what context, especially in a post-COVID world. Important to ensuring success of our partnerships is providing ongoing support to partners through our local team members on the ground who develop a good rapport with them, providing an accessible and safe space for questions and for seeking guidance. When we have this open dialogue and build trust, we are more likely to catch any potential risks before they materialize. And I think this is especially important as we know partnerships are complex and they don't always work the way that we'd like them to. And on projects like GREAT, where we're working with the most vulnerable populations in the countries, it makes it more important to have the right partnerships in place. By setting a strong foundation through due diligence, capacity building, and promoting ownership, and having tools like participatory audits and partnership brokering, you have an increased odds of success in a sustainable partnership, even when faced with challenges. It's this intentional one-team approach to partnerships that does come with some things to keep in mind, however. We need to be very aware of the time, effort, and budget it takes to create tools and space to have partnerships succeed, as well as the increased risk of working with local partners. Low capacity and lack of appropriate safeguarding or financial and organizational policies are key risks that must be considered and overcome in order to ensure quality service delivery. On paper, some of these partners, when we first start to work with them, may not check all of the boxes that our donor may need them to, but again, it doesn't mean that we don't work with them. To pursue participatory partnership, there should be an understanding of increased risk sharing and that capacity building needs and plans should be identified with partners and documented in their development of annual work plans, and that we're able to utilize different implementation and partnership modalities as appropriate. Ones that could involve more mentoring, more research analysis, or promoting a coordination of them working with another partner, or maybe enhanced organizational development. So in summary, working with local partners in a participatory way that intrinsically includes ownership and capacity building is essential to ensure long-term sustainable outcomes. The way of working can require thinking outside the box and having an open conversation with your donor about increased risk sharing for results that are driven for and by local partners. So I hope some of these examples I shared today have got you thinking about different ways we can approach partnerships, and I look forward to having more discussion on this topic in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now we have our third panelist, Marine Celeste. She is with the Equality Fund. For some reason, I kept calling it the Gender Fund during our conversations. But the Equality Fund, I find it to be a very interesting model, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I think the focus that you will be taking is to discuss the lessons learned, and I think I'll read it from the launch of the Activate program in 2021, which provided funding to 23 feminist funds supporting their capacity to move money to local feminist and women rights movements globally, which means it's a lot of partnerships, a lot of work, a lot of due diligence, and other processes that you had to do this. So I'm looking forward to hear from you, and I think after you will start the conversation. I'm going to keep your picture here. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am really happy to be here today to speak a little bit about the work that we've been doing at the Equality Fund. So, as a bit of background, the Equality Fund is an international feminist fund that provides flexible and long-term resources to women's rights and feminist movements globally. So specifically, this looks like grants to individual women's rights organizations, other feminist funds, coalitions and networks, really building the collective power of girls, women, and LGBTQI people. We were launched in 2019 and did our first grant-making cycle in 2020. So in just the first 4 years, we've now committed over 85 million in grants to just over 100 individual women's rights organizations and about 40 feminist funds working in about 90 countries globally. So it's been a really fast and exciting growth of the fund. One of the core elements of our grant-making strategy is really taking an ecosystem approach. So recognizing that the Equality Fund is one of many actors within the feminist funding ecosystem, as we like to call it, and that is a fund in the global north, really thinking about questions of power and positionality vis-a-vis our partners in the global south, and thinking about what are we best and uniquely positioned to do as a fund here in Canada, and where should we really be complementing and bolstering the efforts of others, as opposed to kind of reinventing the wheel, and ultimately trying to get to more and better funding for women's rights organizations and movements globally. So the program I wanted to speak about today is Activate. So this is our partnership with other feminist funds, and for folks that are not as familiar with feminist funds or women's funds, they're kind of used interchangeably. These are grant-making organizations that are established to resource women's rights organizations and movements. So they also provide grants to grassroots organizations, coalitions, feminist activists, and they've typically grown out of the movements, the women's movements within their context, and so really are embedded and accountable to the organizations that they serve. And they're often amongst the only self-led funding organizations within their context. So for example, ISDAO Fund, which is a fund in West Africa, is an LGBTQI activist-led fund that provides grants to LGBTQI organizations in West Africa, in the sub-region. Or FEMI is an Indigenous women-led fund that provides grants to Indigenous women globally. So for the Equality Fund, we felt it was really important to enter into partnerships with other feminist funds working at national, regional, and global level for two key reasons. The first one is really about going wide. So, being able to reach far more organizations than we would be able to do as a single fund in the as the Equality Fund in Canada. So, for example, our current portfolio, we have about about 80 individual women's rights organizations. And in the first year of our partnership with the funds, they were able to reach 500 organizations. So really a multiplier effect in terms of that partnership. And the second reason why we wanted to partner strategically was about going deep. And so ensuring that Equality Fund resources are reaching groups that typically have not been able to access international pots of funding, that are working at a hyper-local level in rural areas, that are emerging organizations, unregistered organizations that just can't access funding as easily. And we knew that feminist funds were really, really good partners in terms of reaching those organizations because, as I mentioned, they're really embedded in coming out of these movements. So to one of the points that one of my co-panelists was speaking about in terms of setting up partnerships from the onset and thinking about how are we entering these funding relationships, this was something that was really top of mind for the Equality Fund. So we are a feminist fund, which means that we were going to be entering to funding relationships with our peers, right? These are other feminist funds. We are part of the same community. We are part of Prospera, which is the international network of women's funds. So these are folks that we know, that we've done joint advocacy, joint research with. And so we were really thinking about what does it look like to enter into a funding relationship? And as feminists, we think a lot about power. So what does it mean to enter into these kinds of funding relationships with our peers? And we had previously done participatory grant-making processes. So that's really about ceding or transferring decision-making power about funding decisions to the communities. And we were thinking about what does this look like in this context, where we know the universe of potential partners, and these are folks that we know. And so we started asking ourselves questions like, what are the costs of running a competitive process when working in community? And does funding have to be based on a competitive process in order to be sort of fair, objective, and transparent? And I was part of the design team that was kind of grappling with these questions, and we came to the conclusion that no, like we could do something different. This is a this is a community of other funders like us that we do a lot of work in. And what we decided to do was a non-competitive participatory process. So what we did is we mapped out all the sort of 50 funds that are part of the network and other sort of human rights funder networks that we're a part of. We invited them all and we said, let's have a conversation. We're sort of a year and a half into lockdowns. Many folks were losing funding because of changing donor priorities. Folks were dealing with increased need from communities. Women were being disproportionately impacted by the lockdowns. So we said, let's come together as a community. The Equality Fund has $14 million over 2 years to provide to sort of some folks within this community. How do we collectively agree on what are the resourcing needs right now? What are the resourcing priorities for this community right now? And so we had really great discussions with the funds, the national funds, the global funds, the regional funds, all together. And we agreed on a set of key resourcing priorities for this first round of grant making. Some of them were, funds that had lost a lot of funding due to cuts in the pandemic, funds that were in a crisis situation, funds that were dealing with closing of civic space and were kind of supporting women human rights defenders, et cetera. So that was kind of the criteria that was set out. And then we invited funds to step up for funding or to step back based on this sort of collective decision-making on resourcing priorities. And about half of the funds stepped back. And we were able to fund all 23 that ended up stepping up for funding. And so that's how we entered into this partnership, which was really, it was a little scary, it was a little exciting because we hadn't really been able to do something like this before. But I think it created a process that people were really excited about. There was a lot of trust. Everyone felt that those who really needed the money in that moment got it. And folks knew that there were other opportunities sort of in 2 years when we were reopening this grant-making cycle. So that's kind of how we started out the funding relationship. In terms of what we've seen, and we're now a year and a half into the Activate partnerships, the funds have been able, as I mentioned, to give out over 500 grants. And the sort of who they're reaching has been really interesting. So over 90% of those grants are going to self-led organizations. So these are really groups that are being led by communities in which they're working in, right? Like not an external group that's coming into a community to benefit them. More than a third of the grants have gone to unregistered organizations. And so on the continent, for example, a lot of these are LGBTQI organizations that cannot be registered for legal and political reasons for their safety. Some of them are women human rights defenders that cannot, again, for their safety be registered. But because funds, again, are part of these movements and have really intentional strategies to be able to reach out to these groups, they've been able to do it, right? About a third of the groups are emerging groups, so less than 5 years old. Over 130 of the grants went to organizations that were first-time grant recipients. So really showing that feminist funds are oftentimes some of the first investors into initiatives that are, conceived by women, girls, and LGBTQI people in their community. So I think for us, kind of going back to the ecosystem approach that I spoke about, Activate has been a really great example of thinking about, what are we best placed to do, and where can we support others who are already doing excellent work to do it even better? So is the Equality Fund sort of best placed to reach a group that is an Indigenous women's group working in a rural area in Nepal, right, through our open calls for funding, or should we be supporting TEWA, the National Nepali Feminist Fund, who is set up to do that work, and giving them grants for them to be able to do that work, right? So this is kind of the ecosystem approach that we're talking about in action and really seeing what that looks like. And it's been really exciting. We just got the second year annual reports, and so I think we're up to about 1,000 organizations that have been reached in 2 years, and we're kind of doing all the analysis right now to see what are the key characteristics. So just to kind of end in terms of some of our lessons learned, for us it's been clear that feminist funds are key to connecting funding to grassroots women's rights organizations. They're able to reach groups that have typically been excluded from funding because of intentional intersectional strategies that they use. We had funds that do outreach to, like the Brazilian fund that does intentional outreach to Indigenous women leaders to ensure that their calls for proposals are reaching those communities, or Women's Fund Fiji, who has calls for proposals in native languages, or Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, who does specific recruitment for trans activists to ensure when they noticed that that was a gap in their portfolio to ensure that calls were going out to those communities. Another thing that we've seen is the importance of quality of partnerships and money. We hear and have heard for years from women's rights movements that money is short-term, project-based, just the quality of the money is not what it needs to be. And so through our funding, we provide core funding that is multi-year, and that has been we've started to see downstream effects of that. So one of the funds that we're supporting for the first time was able to provide multi-year grants to their grantees because they had multi-year commitment through the Equality Fund. One of the funds that we're supporting was able to provide core funding for the first time because it's not based on project, it's not thematic based, et cetera, so they've been able to do that. Some of the funds are using Equality Fund funding to kind of fund all the groups that don't neatly fit into a thematic area of their other donors, right, but are doing really important work. So really seeing the downstream impacts of that. And I think lastly, one thing that we've been thinking a lot about as the Equality Fund around these discussions of localization is moving beyond localization as simply a place-based thing, or a place-based concept rather, and really thinking about it in a more political, sort of movement-based, community-based concept. So, if we have a regional fund in East Africa that is working on LGBTQI issues, maybe their office is not in Burundi, but they are so connected to like the LGBTQI and queer movements in the region that they're able to really connect with them, work with them, know how to best support them, and ensure that the money is working for them. So really just thinking a bit more about when we're talking about localization, it's not just this like a physical office here, but really about belonging to a movement, belonging to a community. So